Here at the Seattle Atheist Church, the members ourselves give many of the talks. We have a planning meeting every quarter, and we just had that, that's open to the whole community, where we brainstorm ideas for talks we'd like to hear and talks we'd like to give. Then we vote on the ideas and schedule the talks that get the most votes. For today, please join me in welcoming Jack, who's giving a talk on feeling rational, curiosity, emotions, and reason, readings from LessWrong. Jack, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Today, I'd like to share with you some selections from LessWrong about the relationship between emotions and reason. Are emotions really irrational, as is commonly thought? What might make an emotion rational, and what might make an emotion irrational? Do we really need to choose between thinking and feeling? This topic comes up often in our discussions, so let's explore it in a bit more depth. For those who aren't familiar, LessWrong is a community dedicated to improving reasoning and decision-making. They seek to hold true beliefs and to be effective at accomplishing their goals. More generally, they work to develop and practice the art of human rationality. Each of these selections is written by Eliezer Yudkowsky around 2006-2007. Sometimes he uses the first person, and it would be too disruptive to the voice of the text to edit that out. So when you hear me say I, that's Eliezer speaking, not me. Our first selection is the LessWrong post titled, "The Lens That Sees Its Flaws." Light leaves the sun and strikes your shoelaces and bounces off. Some photons enter the pupils of your eyes and strike your retina. The energy of the photons triggers neural impulses. The neural impulses are transmitted to the visual processing areas of the brain. And there, the optical information is processed and reconstructed into a 3D model that is recognized as an untied shoelace. And so you believe that your shoelaces are untied. Here is the secret of deliberate rationality. This whole process is not magic, and you can understand it. You can understand how you see your shoelaces. You can think about which sort of thinking processes will generate beliefs which mirror reality, and which thinking processes will not. Mice can see, but they can't understand seeing. You can understand seeing, and because of that, you can do things that mice cannot do. Take a moment to marvel at this, for it is indeed marvelous. Mice see, but they don't know that they have visual cortexes. So they can't correct for optical illusions. A mouse lives in a mental world that includes cats, holes, cheese, and mouse traps, but not mouse brains. Their camera does not take pictures of its own lens. But we, as humans, can look at, for example, the seemingly bizarre image of an optical illusion and realize that part of what we're seeing is the lens itself. You don't always have to believe your own eyes, but you have to realize that you have eyes. You must have distinct mental buckets for the map and the territory, for the senses and reality. Lest you think this is a trivial ability, remember how rare it is in the animal kingdom. The whole idea of science is simply reflective reasoning about a more reliable process for making the contents of your mind mirror the contents of the world. It's the sort of thing mice would never invent. Pondering this business of performing replicable experiments to falsify theories, we can see why it works. Science is not a separate magisterium, far away from real life and the understanding of ordinary mortals. Science is not something that only applies to the inside of laboratories. Science itself is an understandable process in the world that correlates brains with reality. Science makes sense when you think about it. But mice can't think about thinking, which is why they don't have science. One should not overlook the wonder of this, or the potential power it bestows on us as individuals, not just scientific societies. Admittedly, understanding the engine of thought may be a little more complicated than understanding, say, a steam engine, but it is not a fundamentally different task. Once upon a time, I, Eliezer, went to EFNet's philosophy chat room to ask, do you believe a nuclear war will occur in the next 20 years? If no, why not? One person who answered the question said he didn't expect a nuclear war for 100 years because, quote, all of the players involved in decisions regarding nuclear war are not interested right now, end quote. But why extend that out for 100 years, I asked. Pure hope, was his reply. Reflecting on this thought process, we can see why the thought of nuclear war makes the person unhappy, and we can see how his brain therefore rejects the belief. But if you imagine a billion worlds, Everett branches, or Tegmark duplicates, this thought process will not systematically correlate optimists to branches in which no nuclear war occurs. To ask which beliefs make you happy is to turn inward, not outward. It tells you something about yourself, but it is not evidence entangled with the environment. I have nothing against happiness, but it should follow from your picture of the world, rather than tampering with the mental paintbrushes. If you can see this, if you can see that hope is shifting your first order thoughts by too large a degree, if you can understand your mind as a mapping engine that has flaws, then you can apply a reflective correction. The brain is a flawed lens through which we see reality. This is true of both mouse brains and human brains. But a human brain is a flawed lens that can understand its own flaws, its systematic errors, its biases, and apply second-order corrections to them. This, in practice, makes the lens far more powerful. Not perfect, but far more powerful. Our next selection is the post titled, Why Truth and ... The goal of instrumental rationality mostly speaks for itself. Some commenters have wondered, on the other hand, why rationalists care about truth, which invites a few different answers, depending on who you ask. And these different answers have different characters, which can shape the search for truth in different ways. You might hold the view that pursuing truth is inherently noble, important, and worthwhile, in which case your priorities will be determined by your ideals about which truths are most important, or about when truth-seeking is most virtuous. This motivation tends to have a moral character behind it. If you think it your duty to look behind the curtain, you're a lot more likely to believe that someone else should look behind the curtain too, or castigate them if they deliberately close their eyes. I, Eliezer, tend to be suspicious of morality as a motivation for rationality, not because I reject the moral ideal, but because it invites certain kinds of trouble. It is too easy to acquire, as learned moral duties, modes of thinking that are dreadful missteps in the dance. Consider Spock, the naive archetype of rationality. Spock's affect is always set to calm, even when wildly inappropriate. He often gives many significant digits for probabilities that are grossly uncalibrated. For example, Captain, if you steer the Enterprise directly into that black hole, our probability of surviving is only 2.234%. Yet, 9 times out of 10, the Enterprise is not destroyed. 9 times out of 10, the Enterprise survives. What kind of tragic fool gives 4 significant digits for a figure that is off by 2 orders of magnitude? Yet, this popular image is how many people conceive of the duty to be rational. Small wonder that they do not embrace it wholeheartedly. To make rationality into a moral duty is to give it all the dreadful degrees of freedom of an arbitrary tribal custom. People arrive at the wrong answer and then indignantly protest that they acted with propriety rather than learning from their mistake. What other motives are there? Well, you might want to accomplish some specific real-world goal, like building an airplane, and therefore you need to know some specific truth about aerodynamics. Or, more mundanely, you want chocolate milk, and therefore you want to know whether the local grocery store has chocolate milk, so you can choose whether to walk there or somewhere else. If this is the reason you want truth, then the priority you assign to your questions will reflect the expected utility of their information. How much the possible answers influence your choices, how much your choices matter, and how much you expect to find an answer that changes your choice from its default. To seek truth merely for its instrumental value may seem impure. Should we not desire the truth for its own sake? But such investigations are extremely important because they create an outside criterion of verification. If your airplane drops out of the sky, or if you get to the store and find no chocolate milk, it's a hint that you did something wrong. You get feedback on which modes of thinking work and which don't. Another possible motive. You might care about what's true because, damn it, you're curious. As a reason to seek truth, curiosity has a special and admirable purity. If your motive is curiosity, you will assign priority to questions according to how the questions themselves tickle your aesthetic sense. Trickier challenge, with a greater probability of failure, may be worth more effort than a simpler one, just because it's more fun. Curiosity and morality can both attach an intrinsic value to truth. Yet being curious about what's behind the curtain is a very different state of mind from believing that you have a moral duty to look there. If you're curious, your priorities will be determined by which truths you find most intriguing, not most important or most useful. Although pure curiosity is a wonderful thing, it may not linger too long on verifying its answers once the attractive mystery is gone. Curiosity, as a human emotion, has been around since long before the ancient Greeks. But what set humanity firmly on the path of science was noticing that certain modes of thinking uncovered beliefs that let us manipulate the world. Truth as an instrument. As far as sheer curiosity goes, spinning campfire tales of gods and heroes satisfied that desire just as well. And no one realized that there was anything wrong with that. At the same time, if we're going to improve our skills of rationality, go beyond the standards of performance set by hunter-gatherers, we'll need deliberate beliefs about how to think. Things that look like norms of rationalist propriety. When we write new mental programs for ourselves, they start out as explicit injunctions, and only slowly, if ever, are trained into the neural circuitry that underlies our core motivations and habits. Curiosity, pragmatism, and quasi-moral injunctions are all key to the rationalist project. Yet, if you were to ask me which of these is most fundamental, I, Eliezer, would say curiosity. I have my principles, and I have my plans, which may well tell me to look behind the curtain. But then, I also just really want to know. What will I see? The world has handed me a puzzle, and the solution feels tantalizingly close. Our final selection is the post titled Feeling Rational. Since curiosity is an emotion, I suspect that some people will object to treating curiosity as part of rationality. A popular belief about rationality is that rationality opposes all emotion. that all of our sadness and all of our joy are automatically anti-logical by virtue of being feelings. Yet, strangely enough, I can't find any theorem of probability theory which proves that I should appear ice cold and expressionless. When people think of emotion and rationality as opposed, I suspect they are really thinking of System 1 and System 2. Fast, perceptual judgments versus slow, deliberative judgments. System 2's deliberative judgments aren't always true, and System 1's perceptual judgments aren't always false. So it's very important to distinguish that dichotomy from rationality. Both systems can serve the goal of truth or defeat it, depending on how they're used. For my part, I label an emotion as not rational if it rests on mistaken beliefs, or rather, on mistake-producing epistemic conduct. It is written that, quote, if the iron approaches your face and you believe it is hot and it is cold, then the way opposes your fear. If the iron approaches your face and you believe it is cool and it is hot, then the way opposes your calm, end quote. Conversely, an emotion that is evoked by correct beliefs or truth-conducive thinking is a rational emotion. And this has the advantage of letting us regard calm as an emotional state rather than as a privileged default. So, is rationality orthogonal to feeling? No. Our emotions arise from our models of reality. If I, Eliezer, believe that my dead brother has been discovered alive, I will be happy. If I wake up and realize it was a dream, I will be sad. P.C. Hodgel said, that which can be destroyed by the truth should be. My dreaming self's happiness was opposed by truth. My sadness on waking is rational. There is no truth which destroys it. Rationality begins by asking how the world is, but spreads virally to any other thought which depends on how we think the world is. Your beliefs about how the world is can concern anything you think is out there in reality. Anything that either does or does not exist. Any member of the class, things that can make other things happen. If you believe that there is a goblin in your closet that ties your shoes' laces together, then this is a belief about how the world is. Your shoes are real. You can pick them up. If there's something out there that can reach out and tie your shoelaces together, it must be real too. Part of the vast web of causes and effects we call the universe. Feeling angry at the goblin who tied your shoelaces involves a state of mind that is not just about how the world is. Suppose that as a Buddhist or a lobotomy patient, or just a very phlegmatic person, finding your shoelaces tied together didn't make you angry. This wouldn't affect what you expected to see in the world. You'd still expect to open your closet and find your shoelaces tied together. Your anger or calm shouldn't affect your best guess here, because what happens in your closet does not depend on your emotional state of mind, though it may take some effort to think that clearly. But the angry feeling is tangled up with a state of mind that is about how the world is. You become angry because you think the goblin tied your shoelaces. The criterion of rationality spreads virally from the initial question of whether or not a goblin tied your shoelaces to the resulting anger. Becoming more rational, that is, arriving at better estimates of how the world is, can diminish feelings or intensify them. Sometimes we run away from strong feelings by denying the facts, by flinching away from the view of the world that gave rise to the powerful emotion. If so, then as you study the skills of rationality and train yourself not to deny facts, your feelings will become stronger, not weaker. In my early days, I, Eliezer, was never quite certain whether it was all right to feel things strongly, whether it was allowed, or whether it was proper. I do not think this confusion arose only from my youthful misunderstanding of rationality. I've observed similar troubles in people who do not even aspire to be rationalists. When they're happy, they wonder if they're really allowed to be happy. And when they're sad, they're never quite sure whether they should run away from the emotion or not. Since the days of Socrates, at least, and probably long before, the way to appear cultured and sophisticated has been to never let anyone see you care strongly about anything. It's embarrassing to feel. It's just not done in polite society. You should see the strange looks I get when people realize how much I care about rationality. It's not the unusual subject, I think, but that they're not used to seeing sane adults who visibly care about anything. But I know now that there's nothing wrong with feeling strongly. Ever since I adopted the rule of that which can be destroyed by the truth should be, I've also come to realize that which the truth nourishes should thrive. When something good happens, I am happy, and there is no confusion in my mind about whether it is rational for me to be happy. When something terrible happens, I do not flee my sadness by searching for fake consolations and false silver linings. I visualize the past and future of humankind, the tens of billions of deaths over our history, the misery and fear, the search for answers, the trembling hands reaching upward out of so much blood. What we could become someday when we make the stars our cities. All that darkness and all that light. I know that I can never truly understand it, and I haven't the words to say. Despite all my philosophy, I'm still embarrassed to confess strong emotions, and you're probably uncomfortable hearing them. But I know now that it is rational to feel. That's all from our readings for today, and I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. Let's discuss.